Hey guys, tonight we're heading back, way back, to ancient Rome, where you'll find yourself wandering a marble courtyard just past sunset. The air is thick with warmth and the faint sweetness of crushed rose petals. Somewhere nearby, a clay pot simmers gently over an open flame. You catch a whiff of something floral, with a sharp resinous edge, maybe myrrh, or possibly just someone overdoing it with imported cinnamon oil. Either way, you breathe it in and, oddly enough, your shoulders relax. In this world, scent is everything. It clings to statues, lingers in baths, and floats above the heads of senators who definitely haven't washed their togas in a week. You're about to learn that making perfume wasn't just a luxury in ancient Rome. It was art, science, and a surprising excuse for some very dramatic gossip. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tiptoe past the colonnades into the garden. A slave girl walks by with a basket of freshly plucked flowers, jasmine, mostly, with a few violets and something white that smells a bit like honey left out in the sun too long. The flowers will be pounded into a paste with olive oil and then strained through linen, again and again, until every drop of aroma is coaxed from their delicate petals. You duck under an arch, careful not to brush against the hanging lavender bundles. They're suspended like bats from the ceiling, hundreds of them drying for the next round of ointments. Lavender was the Roman duct tape of the scent world. Good for perfume, sure, but also for baths, insect bites, and whatever spiritual cleansing was trending that week. In the corner, a small amphora is being stirred with a wooden paddle. It contains a thick sludge of oil, honey, and crushed cinnamon bark. You're told it's for a senator's birthday gift. Although, by the look of the gunky texture, you're not sure whether it's meant to be worn or eaten. The lines were blurry back then. You pause near a stone shelf that holds tightly stoppered flasks, each made from blown glass, so thin it catches the moonlight like water. These are the finished perfumes, labeled with wax seals and faded ink. Rose of Capua, cedar from Lebanon, nard of Syria. You realize these aren't names, they're statements. Each tiny bottle is a flex of wealth, trade routes, and taste. Now, here's where you might want to lean in. Despite the luxurious surroundings, despite the marble and the mosaics and the fanboys of frankincense, ancient Roman hygiene wasn't exactly modern. Baths, yes. Soap, not really. So, perfumes weren't always there to enhance. Sometimes, they were there to mask. You probably won't survive this next detail. In the sweltering summer heat, the average Roman might apply oil and perfume, but skip the actual scrubbing. Imagine marinating in musk without ever hitting the shower. Yep, still, nobody seemed to mind too much. In fact, many believed that scent was proof of civilization. You weren't truly Roman unless you smelled like something from halfway across the known world. Civility had a fragrance, and it wasn't local. Historians still argue whether perfumes were actually used daily by common folk or just reserved for elite rituals. Some evidence, bits of amphorae found in humble homes, suggests even the average citizen had access to basic scented oils. Others say those were just leftovers, knockoffs, or even reused containers. Kind of like keeping a luxury perfume box on your shelf long after the real thing's gone. Now let's talk about tools. You glance to your left and spot a brass mortar and pestle, worn smooth from grinding. Next to it, funnels of horn, linen filters, and oddly enough, a shallow silver bowl with what looks like beeswax stuck to the sides. That's for making solid perfume. Yes, they had that too. Mix your scent with beeswax, slap it on your neck, and you're good to go. One imagines a few poorly timed Roman sunbathers melting their scented wax under the midday glare. Not ideal. You might also notice a faint buzzing. No, not bees. Just the hum of flies attracted to a pot of aging unguent that's been left to mature. Scent masters claim this gave the mixture depth. Critics might call it spoiled. One trick? Add resin from the terebinth tree to stabilize the aroma. Another? Let it ferment with spikenard root for weeks. Sound appetizing? A few feet away, an apprentice clumsily tries to stir a batch of rose oil, sweat beading on their forehead. You know it's not just the heat. If they get the balance wrong, too much oil, too little infusion, the batch might sour. And since each ingredient came from faraway provinces, that's not just a waste of time. It's basically financial sabotage. There's a little wooden board propped against the wall with symbols scratched in. A kind of recipe card, but coded. Roman perfumers were notoriously secretive. That blend of lily, cinnamon, and myrrh you liked? Good luck getting the formula. It's like trying to reverse engineer Coca-Cola. Only stickier. Here's a fun tidbit. Some recipes included crocodile dung. Yep, crocodile dung, dried and powdered, was sometimes used in cosmetics and supposedly in sunscreen. Whether it made it into perfumes, historians are still sniffing that one out. As night deepens, you stretch out on a bench near the fountain. The water trickles, mingling with the fading scents of jasmine and clove. You wonder what tomorrow's blend will be. Something bold, subtle, or something weirdly fishy and sharp, like the concoction favored by Emperor Elagabalus, who once reportedly filled a banquet ceiling with hidden perfume sprayers. Lavish, extra, possibly a fire hazard. Your eyelids grow heavy, lulled by the rhythm of ancient rituals and gently boiling oils. In this world, nothing is rushed. Even the act of smelling good is deliberate, slow, and full of ritual. The fire crackles one last time, and you drift into silence. You wake, or rather, drift, from the edge of sleep to the faint squish of olives being crushed. Somewhere nearby, a wide stone press groans under its own weight. A man in a linen tunic wipes sweat from his brow with an arm already coated in oil. The scent that wafts over to you is unmistakable, green, grassy, thick with the promise of something far more luxurious once it's mixed, steeped, and tamed. This, dear sleeper, is where it all begins, not with roses or resins, but with olives. Roman perfume, you see, has humble origins. Before you can smell like a demigod, someone has to press several 100 pounds of olives until they surrender their juice. Olive oil was the base for nearly every Roman unguent, the silky carrier that let fragrance cling to skin. And let's be honest, it also meant a whole lot of very shiny forearms. The oil doesn't smell like much yet, kind of like wet grass and slightly metallic stone. But it's pure, and that's key. Impure oil would sour too quickly. In fact, some perfumers would let the oil age in ceramic jars for weeks, even months, to reduce its natural scent before introducing their stars, the botanicals, the animal extracts, and yes, the occasional terrifying thing like crushed beetles. You move closer and notice a second pile, not olives this time, but plants. Rosemary, marjoram, thyme. They'll be steeped in the oil during a process called enfleurage. It's not fast. In fact, it's mind-numbingly slow. But you're not going anywhere, are you? The workshop smells like a forest floor kissed by sun. The walls are darkened with soot from years of open flame heating. In one corner, an old perfumer mutters to himself while stirring something that looks disturbingly like burnt honey. Galbanum, he grunts, barely glancing your way. Smells like a temple caught fire. But the gods love it. Galbanum. Bitter, sharp, green. It was one of the more polarizing ingredients. The kind of scent that made your nose twitch and your enemies wince. But when used right, it was magic. Galbanum had staying power. It clung to skin like ambition. Nearby, a young apprentice gently fans a jar of oil layered with rose petals. He swaps them out daily. It's delicate work. Petals bruise easily and spoil the batch. He looks like he hasn't blinked in an hour. You almost feel bad for him. But then you remember, you're lying in a dream world while he's trying not to ruin 40 solid hours of labor. So you move on. Roman perfumes weren't just about flowers, though. Roots were big. Think vetiver, iris, spikenard. If it grew in the ground and made your feet smell like an herb garden after 3 days in sandals, they tried to bottle it. The logic was simple. Nature gave you everything. You just had to mash it, boil it, and make it smell expensive. Fringe fact incoming. One lesser-known scent additive? Hen's fat. Yep. Rendered chicken grease was occasionally used as a fixative. Nothing like a touch of poultry to make your nard oil pop. And if you're wondering, yes, there were recipes. Some carved into clay tablets, others hidden in scrolls now reduced to papery ghosts in dusty museum drawers. But most knowledge was passed mouth to ear, master to apprentice, with side eyes and secrets. You didn't just learn perfumery, you inherited it, like a scandal. Historians still debate whether Roman perfume-making techniques came straight from the Greeks or were heavily influenced by the Egyptians. Some argue the entire industry was just Rome playing catch-up with older, smellier empires. Others insist Romans refined the art by creating the most durable, long-lasting oils. Both might be true, but the real answer is probably lost somewhere between Alexandria and a badly labeled amphora. You pause near a shallow bronze basin where myrrh resin is being melted down. It crackles as it hits the surface, releasing a ghost of scent, warm, dry, a little like sap caught on fire in a good way. Myrrh wasn't just perfume. It was medicine, incense, even currency. Traders carried it in wax-sealed pots across deserts, seas, and war zones. Also, someone in Rome could dab a drop behind their ear. Next to the myrrh, a pot of cinnamon oil simmers. Real cinnamon, not the grocery store kind, but true cinnamomum verum, imported from India and guarded like treasure. The cost? Astronomical, but worth it, especially if you were throwing a dinner party and wanted guests to remember the scent of your atrium more than your mediocre stuffed dormice. And speaking of parties, Romans believed perfume was as essential to hosting as wine. You didn't just anoint yourself. You doused the couches, perfumed the walls, even soaked the drapes. Some hosts would drizzle scented oil into fountains so it misted lightly over guests. A gentle aroma of roses and arrogance. One guest, Pliny the Elder, not known for mincing words, once complained that perfumed guests made it impossible to identify the poor by smell alone. Thanks, Pliny. Back in the workshop, things are heating up. A perfumer slowly adds frankincense to a fresh oil batch, his movements deliberate. You catch a glimpse of a recipe tablet etched with symbols: cedar, benzoin, iris, myrrh. It reads like a dreamy grocery list. You wonder what it smells like as a blend. Spicy? Sweet? Overbearing? Like your great aunt who still thinks Shalimar is subtle? It's around this time that your nose starts to dull. Everything blends together into a soft swirl of earth and bloom and time. The workshop feels slower, older, as if the air itself is rich with memory, scented not just by what's brewing now, but by centuries of quiet labor and fragrant failures. A light wind brushes through the open door. You catch a strange smell, not floral, not spicy, but oddly familiar. Toasted? Almost smoky vanilla? You ask what it is. Labdanum. The old perfumer murmurs without turning. Scraped off goat beards in Crete. You blink. Goats? Beards? Crete? Oh yes. They'd let goats graze through labdanum bushes, then scrape the sticky resin from their fur. It was prized for its musky, leathery scent, a favorite base note for serious, brooding perfumes. You know, the ones that say, "I've conquered a province or two." The moon hangs higher now. The firewood pops, and the scent in the room thickens into a kind of perfumed hush. It's like walking into a memory that never belonged to you. You don't need to speak. Just inhale. You wake, or rather, sink, deeper into this world of oil and incense, just as a new smell curls toward you. It's not floral or fruity. It's something cooked, thick, almost metallic. You follow it across the perfumery workshop to a low brick furnace, where two clay vessels sit, sweating beside a bank of coals. One of the apprentices peers inside a lidless pot, occasionally stirring its contents with a long, bronze rod. This, you learn, is where distillation begins, or at least Rome's version of it. There are no copper stills here, no neat spigots or pressure gauges. Instead, you're dealing with the old-fashioned approach: controlled evaporation, patient condensation, and a prayer to Mercury that nothing explodes. You kneel beside one of the amphorae, watching steam rise from a blend of resin and wine. Roman perfumers had a few tricks for coaxing aroma out of stubborn ingredients, and one of them was alcohol. Not the drinkable kind. Well, not anymore, but rough, fermented wine left out just long enough to burn your nose and loosen up a tree bark or two. You look closer. Inside the pot, a slurry of roots and leaves slowly breaks down. The apprentice carefully adjusts the lid, flat stone with a concave dip, and pours cold water into its surface. This makes steam rise, condense on the underside, and then trickle into a little cup placed in the center. Ancient condensation. Roman perfume logic. It's clunky, a little dangerous, and surprisingly effective. This isn't true distillation, historians argue, at least not like the later Arabic or alchemical methods. But it's proto-distillation. The Romans didn't invent the process, but they definitely flirted with it, poked at it, then then poured the results into expensive flasks and sold them at the forum. You're offered a whiff of the final product, a vial of spikenard distilled in this very setup. It's earthy and green with an oddly mini sharpness. Not your typical rose water, but it sticks in your nose and your brain. There's a reason Roman generals used it to scent their armor. Nearby, another apprentice is busy making an unguentum nardinum, a type of ointment made from spikenard and myrrh. He grinds dried spikenard roots into a powder, adds them to a vat of aged olive oil, then heats the mixture until it thickens into something halfway between syrup and salve. You touch a sample dabbed on a square of linen. It's sticky, waxy, but not unpleasant. In a moment of sleepy confusion, you almost think it smells like antique bookstores. Maybe a little leather-bound scroll thrown in. You'd wear that, right? What you're witnessing, in slow motion, is a kind of sensory alchemy. Romans didn't talk in chemical formulas, but they understood transformation. They knew what heat did to oil, what water pulled from petals, what a few drops of vinegar could do to a resin that refused to yield its fragrance. Take, for example, iris root. On its own, it smells like absolutely nothing. Dry, chalky. But leave it in a dark jar for 3 years, and something magical happens. It ferments, breaks down, evolves into a powdery, almost violet-like scent that clings to the skin like a secret. No one really knows how the Romans figured that out. Maybe accident, maybe obsession, probably both. Another resin being distilled nearby is a popanax, sometimes called sweet myrrh. It's thick, brown, and smells like honey got drunk at a bonfire. You watch as it melts slowly into oil, sending little bursts of scent into the air every time it hisses. The heat in the workshop grows thick. Your breath feels syrupy. You move outside for a moment, leaning on a warm marble column. The sky is beginning to glow with that inky pre-dawn blue. Even the birds are holding their breath. You realize you've just watched an entire night of perfume making, and not a single spray bottle in sight. A few yards away, a young girl in a rough tunic pours freshly made perfume into tiny glass vessels. The bottles themselves are art, thin-necked, translucent, with little swirls of color baked in during the blowing process. Some are stoppered with cork, others with tiny folds of linen dipped in beeswax. Fringe fact: Roman glass was so fine, it rivaled anything made until the Renaissance. Some perfume bottles have been found buried for nearly 2,000 years, still with traces of scent inside. You imagine archaeologists uncorking one and catching the ghost of a long-dead emperor's cologne. Spicy, regal, possibly laced with civet. Ah yes, civet. Let's talk about that. While the Romans didn't widely use animal musk like later perfumers did, they were not above experimenting. Civet, derived from the glands of a certain wild cat, was known for its strong, almost fecal bass note that mellowed into something warm and seductive. Not for the faint of nose. Historians still argue whether Romans had direct access to civet or if they substituted it with local stand-ins. Fermented goat hair, maybe? Dried beaver castor sacks? There are gaps in the olfactory record, and honestly, that might be for the best. Back in the workshop, the air is sweet again. The furnace has died down, the clay vessels are cooling, and the apprentices have started to clean. They scrub pots with hot vinegar, then dry them upside down on racks woven from palm leaves. Even their cleaning supplies smell better than most modern skincare. You lie back against a wall warmed by morning sun. Your skin is slick with oils from leaning, your clothes faintly stained by smoke and flowers. But you don't mind. You smell like work, craft, time, like someone who just distilled a scent no one else in the empire could afford. Before your eyes close again, you catch one last image. An old perfumer gently sniffing a completed blend, smiling faintly, then sealing the amphora with wax and twine. No label, just instinct. The batch is done. The scent lives now. The sun creeps up behind the terracotta rooftops, casting a golden hue over the dusty courtyard. You're still half lounging against the perfumer's wall, your clothes faintly damp with the oily souvenirs of the night's experiments. But now it's morning, and with it comes the business of scent shopping. You shuffle toward the marketplace, where the real theater begins, not the distillation, not the steeping or fermenting, but the parade of ingredients. The stalls here don't just sell flowers and roots. They seduce. They tempt. They shout, whisper, and sometimes outright lie. You pass one vendor shouting about the purity of his saffron threads, dyed so brightly they look like sunlight frozen into hair. Saffron wasn't just a spice. In Roman perfumery, it was gold that grew in crocus form. Crushed into oil, it lent an earthy, floral scent beloved by the rich and powerful. Too much, though, and it made you smell like you'd rolled through your dinner. Further on, you catch the heavy sweetness of rose. Roman roses weren't your average backyard variety. These were deep, rich, and carefully cultivated in places like Paestum or Capua. They were harvested just after dawn, when their petals were still kissed with dew and their fragrance the strongest. You lean in to inhale a handful from a merchant's stall, but he swats your hand away. "No sniffing unless you're buying," he mutters, eyes narrowed. Beyond that, the market gets earthier. Stalls overflow with bark, cassia from Arabia, cinnamon from Ceylon, and what might be cedar from Lebanon if the vendor isn't lying. You crack open a dried pod and immediately regret it. It smells like an old library caught fire. Galbanum, the merchant explains with a grin. Acquired taste. Galbanum again. Apparently, it's the kale of Roman perfumes. Everybody says it's amazing, but you're not quite convinced. Still, you tuck a vial into your bag. You never know when you might want to smell like ancient anxiety. You move on to a booth lined with clay jars marked in red ink. Myrrha, storax, benzoin. The labels are smudged, the jars sticky with residue. Myrrh, of course, is everywhere in Rome. Burned in temples, mixed into wine, and dabbed behind ears. But this merchant also carries storax, a resin with a balsamic vanilla scent, and benzoin, sweet and powdery, almost pastry-like. You almost want to eat it. Probably don't. Fringe fact, storax was sometimes used to embalm bodies and flavor candy. There's a crossover no one asked for. At the next stall, you stop short. It's the smell of something exotic. Wild. Almost feral. The merchant gestures proudly at a bundle wrapped in silk. Inside, chunks of something waxy and dark. Nard, he says in a hushed tone, from the Himalayas. You try to look unimpressed. But honestly, it smells divine. Sharp and floral with a spicy finish, like incense took a vacation and came back mysterious. Nard, also called spikenard, was one of the most prized scent ingredients in Rome. It traveled thousands of miles along trade routes riddled with pirates, sandstorms, and economic collapse. You hold the vial gently, as if it might whisper trade secrets. Next to the nard is something far less charming, asafoetida. Nicknamed the devil's dung by modern chefs, this root resin smells like garlic's evil twin. And yet, when used properly, very properly, it could enhance perfume blends with its warm, almost amber-like undertone. Just don't spill it on your tunic. Historians still argue whether ingredients like asafoetida and onion-like scorodite were ever seriously used in Roman perfumery, or if they were medicinal only. But evidence suggests at least some of these oddballs made it into experimental blends. Maybe by daring perfumers, or deeply confused apprentices. You stop by a booth selling animal products, ethically sourced, of course, by ancient standards, which means probably not. The jars are unmarked, but a young boy eagerly tells you they contain beaver castoreum, goat musk, and rare shell extract, which you suspect is just crushed mollusk. You recoil slightly at the musky aroma rising from the nearest jar. It smells like something your laundry would never recover from. But paired with florals or herbs, these musky components helped anchor a scent, giving it that long-lasting something that no flower alone could provide. Beyond the pungent, you find a calmer corner of the market. Here, the herbs reign: mint, sage, marjoram, chamomile. These aren't always used as stars in perfume, but they support the blend like reliable background singers. A little mint might sharpen a rose. A bit of sage could ground a citrus blend. You lean in and crush a sprig of marjoram between your fingers. It smells clean, like a garden path after rain. And then there are the fruits: dried citrus peels, fig pulp, and quince skins. Roman perfumers occasionally used fruit not for sweetness, but for their tart, sharp oils. Lemon balm and bitter orange added brightness, like dabbing sunshine behind your ears. You buy a little sack of dried citron peel and wonder if you'll ever figure out what to do with it. Probably forget it in your cloak pocket until spring. The marketplace is winding down now. Merchants pack their wares into carts and baskets. A few are already spritzing themselves with sample blends. You notice one woman walking past, and her perfume lingers long after she's gone. vanilla, myrrh, and something green and spicy. Probably nard. You hate her. Just a little. You wander back toward the workshop, arms full of sachets and jars, smelling like every spice rack in the Mediterranean. The perfumers are already heating the morning's oil, preparing to infuse it with the day's harvest. You hand over your ingredients to the master blender. He barely glances at them, gives you a grunt of approval, and starts mixing. No ceremony, just experience. Back in the corner, a few apprentices argue over whether balsam of Judea is better aged or fresh. One insists it loses its character in the heat. The other claims the opposite. Historians still argue this too, whether aging improves scent or if freshness matters more. The truth probably depends on the blend, and on whether you're buying or selling. As the fire kicks up again and the scent of cinnamon and pine resin fills the room, you realize the true miracle isn't any single ingredient. It's the act of balance, of turning bark, flowers, sap, and the occasional goat-sourced horror into something so beautiful it lingers for days. And if you get it right, people remember you, not your name, not your face, but the way you smelled when you passed them in the street. The fire is crackling again, perfumed smoke drifting lazily upward, but you're not in the workshop this time. You've wandered deeper into the inner sanctum, where the air is heavy with concentration. A few apprentice noses are pressed dramatically against cloth swatches, eyes shut, lips twitching with indecision. This is the domain of the nose, the Roman perfumer's most precious tool. No, not the long marble statuesque kind you see in busts, but the trained, highly sensitive, ridiculously overworked human variety. You perch on a stool nearby as a master perfumer lifts a tiny glass vial to his nostrils and inhales with the gravitas of a priest receiving divine revelation. He doesn't speak. He just closes his eyes, thinks, then nods. Blend approved. You begin to wonder, how exactly does someone train their nose in ancient Rome? There were no scented markers, no olfactory flashcards. Turns out, it's mostly about exposure, repetition, and the occasional unfortunate sniff of something you wish you hadn't recognized. Your training starts now. First, goats. Yes, goats. You're handed a rag steeped in the musky oils scraped from goat beards after a long summer of grazing through labdanum bushes. The scent is thick, tar-like, and strangely comforting? Or maybe you're just delirious. Next, resin. You're given a lump of something shiny and amber-colored, possibly frankincense, maybe just shellac. You're told to chew it. You do. Regret immediately. But the flavor sends signals up your nose, connecting scent and taste in ways you didn't expect. This, apparently, is essential. The Romans knew the nose and tongue were co-conspirators in decoding the world. You start to learn scent families, not through charts, but through actual objects. A lemon is sliced. You sniff the peel, the juice, the pith. Then you smell lemon balm, then citron zest, then dried verbena leaves. Slowly, your brain starts sorting citrus, green, sharp, sweet. It's messy, but it's working. Then comes a test. You're blindfolded, handed 3 swatches, and asked to describe them. The first smells like cinnamon and something milky, probably cassia soaked in almond oil. The second is brighter, a little bracing, maybe rosemary and vinegar. The third smells like a wet sandal after a long walk through a basil field. Correct, says the master perfumer. You pass. Of course, not all noses are equal. Roman sources talk about suavitas odoratus, sweetness of smell, as both a gift and a curse. If your sense of smell was too sharp, you could be distracted, disgusted, even nauseated. One perfumer famously gave up the profession because he couldn't stop detecting donkey sweat in otherwise perfect blends. Fringe fact? Some Romans actually trained their sense of smell by sniffing foul odors, rotting meat, dung, unwashed tunics, so that their brains would recalibrate and better identify the subtle beauty of a rare oil. It's olfactory tough love. There's also a spiritual angle to all this. The act of smelling was believed to link the material and the divine. When you caught a whiff of perfume, you weren't just enjoying a scent. You were touching something beyond yourself. A whisper from the gods. Or maybe just a really fancy merchant. Still, scent was considered persuasive. Senators anointed with saffron and cinnamon walked into the Senate smelling like power. Women wore myrrh to temples not just for allure, but for spiritual resonance. Even the poor, when they could afford it, dabbed themselves with cheap rose oil before funerals, sent to carry them into the afterlife. You walk past a wall hung with scrolls, fragile, curling sheets covered in faded ink. They hold records of scent experiments, failed blends, and names of oils long lost to history. One entry catches your eye: oil of Rhodope's tears. You don't know who Rhodope was. No one does. But the name is enough to make you imagine a perfume of morning, salt water, and faded roses. Some of the most respected perfumers in Rome were foreigners: Greeks, Egyptians, even Syrians, bringing their own ingredients and methods. The Romans were snobs, sure, but when it came to scent, they knew genius when they inhaled it. There was even a sort of celebrity status to master noses. The best ones were whispered about in high society, recommended to noble families, and sometimes brought in to create custom blends for weddings, births, and political campaigns. Nothing says "vote for me" like smelling like money and frankincense. You find yourself drawn to a small side room where a young woman works alone. She's blending something called succinum, a famed Egyptian perfume made of lily, myrrh, cinnamon, and oil. She's careful, stirring with the end of a stylus, her face inches from the bowl. When she lifts her eyes to you, you notice her nose twitching slightly, almost involuntarily, as if it's constantly filtering and categorizing every scent molecule in the room. She lets you try a drop. It's heavy, head-spinning, floral but dark, like lily flowers soaked in incense and ambition. This isn't a playful scent. It's serious. It means business. You instantly stand up straighter. As you sit with the smell, you realize something. Roman perfume wasn't just about masking odor or even seduction. It was communication. You could announce who you were, or who you wanted to be, without speaking. You could shift mood, command attention, demand respect, all with a dab. You return to the main room, where the apprentices are debating whether vinegar-based blends last longer on skin than wine-based ones. The answer? It depends on the oil, and the skin, and the climate, and the moon, probably. Historians still argue whether Roman perfumers had a scientific method or whether it was mostly guesswork backed by expensive trial and error. Some say their blends were guided by instinct and taste. Others insist there were mathematical ratios, closely guarded and passed down like magic spells. Maybe it's both. Maybe the math was in the memory of the nose. The day winds down. The air is soft now, filled with traces of dozens of scent trials. You lie down on a woven mat, your head resting on a bundle of dried bay leaves. Around you, the world smells like sweat and success, failure and lilac. It's not clean. It's not sterile. It's layered and strange and human. And just before you fall asleep again, you smile. Because now, you've got the nose for it. You wake to the gentle clatter of sandals across mosaic tiles and the distant slosh of oil being poured from one amphora to another. The perfumery is humming again, but this morning it's different. Louder. Showier. The apprentices are bickering over application methods. Someone spilled a whole bowl of saffron-infused almond oil. And in the corner, two women are sniffing each other's necks like perfumed cats. It's time to talk about who wore perfume, and more interestingly, how. You might assume perfumes in Rome were for women, used sparingly behind the ears or at temples. In that polite and dainty way we tend to imagine ancient elegance. But that would be very, very wrong. Roman men were not shy with scent. In fact, sometimes they were downright slathered. You head into the dressing room of a wealthy Roman household. A young nobleman is being massaged with a thick ointment of spikenard and cinnamon. He's chatting about chariot race odds while an assistant gently rubs oil between each toe. His hair has already been perfumed, likely with myrrh water or rose infusion. And next up is the underarm region. Yes, that gets its own oil too. Possibly lavender. Possibly basil. Definitely strong. To Roman elites, scent wasn't feminine or masculine. It was status, cleanliness, style, and yes, sometimes excessive. Emperor Otho was rumored to never go anywhere without a vial of his personal blend, and he supposedly smelled like cinnamon and roses even during battle. Imagine trying to swing a sword while making sure your scent profile stays sharp. Then there's Emperor Nero. Legend says he installed pipes in his palace that sprayed rosewater during feasts. Some claim the ceiling even rained perfume petals. Historians still argue whether that's true or just Nero's press team getting creative with the truth. Either way, It tells you how deeply scent was embedded in the idea of power. You sit down beside a young woman twisting her hair into tight braids. She dips her fingers into a pot of solid perfume, likely a blend of beeswax and iris root, then smooths it onto the ends of each braid. The scent, a light floral with a touch of musk, will stay with her for days. And it wasn't just hair and armpits. Romans perfumed their clothes, their jewelry, even the soles of their feet. Yes, sandals with scent. Imagine leaving a trail of cinnamon and jasmine behind you with every step. Very dramatic, very impractical, very Roman. Fringe fact: some well-to-do citizens had their slaves lightly dust garments with powdered resin or mist cloaks with diluted oils before parties. One particularly extra aristocrat had his slaves scent his coin pouch so that people remembered not just the weight of his money, but its fragrance too. In public baths, men and women would coat themselves in perfumed oils after their soak. Not subtle oils either, bold ones. Think clove, myrrh, or exotic floral blends. It was a social norm, like cologne after the gym, but more intense and with more elbowing. You wander through a textile market where merchants offer bolts of linen that already carry the scent of cedar or almond oil, infused during storage to keep moths away, sure, but also to impress clients. If your toga smells like imported sandalwood, people assume your brain is equally refined. And then there's the romance angle. Scent was seduction. Ovid himself, Rome's smoothest poetic flirt, suggested applying perfume to your lover's bed linens. Not too much, he warns, or you'll seem desperate. Good advice, even today. One perfumer confides in you that men often requested custom blends to woo a specific woman. More honeyed notes if she's shy, he says with a wink. Sharp citrus if she's bold. You ask if it worked. He just shrugs. They always come back, either for the girl or for stronger oil. Of course, not everyone approved of this scented self-indulgence. Stoic philosophers, always ready to ruin a good time, criticized men who spent too much time gilding themselves in foreign flowers. Seneca himself allegedly mocked men who reeked more of Arabia than of virtue. Okay, Seneca, we get it. You preferred sandalwood of the soul. But the backlash didn't stop the scented tide. If anything, it made perfume a kind of rebellion. A declaration that you deserved to smell good. That your very skin was a canvas. And the perfume? Your invisible signature. You pass a trio of young men comparing arm scents. One smells like honey and rosemary. Another like pine and lemon balm. The third? Something so peppery and musky it makes your eyes water. That's the Syrian blend, he says proudly. Imported. Of course it is. Even gladiators got in on the action. They'd sometimes anoint their muscles with scented oil before combat. Not just for show, but because oil helped prevent weapons from sticking to sweaty skin. And let's be honest, if you're going to die in the arena, you might as well smell like lilies and ambition. Historians still debate whether perfume was truly an everyday ritual or something reserved for special occasions. Archaeological finds of perfume flasks in ordinary homes suggest broader use. But the expensive ingredients, the time-intensive production, and the social flair make it clear perfume was aspirational, a luxury to reach for, even if your toga had more patches than fabric. You return once again to the perfumery, where a new blend is being tested. The lead perfumer hands you a thin strip of linen dipped in oil. Try this, she says. You raise it to your nose. It smells like crushed violets, like warmed honey, like leather dried in the sun, but also like something else. Something you can't quite place. Memory, maybe. Desire. Home. She nods knowingly. That's how you know it works. And suddenly, it makes sense. Perfume isn't just about smelling nice. It's about control. Over how you're perceived. Over what people remember. Over what lingers in the air long after you've left the room. You close your eyes. Let the scent settle in. Let it become part of your skin. You're not just someone who uses perfume now. You are the perfume. The air has changed. It's heavier now. Still fragrant. But there's a solemn hush threading through the perfumery. The apprentices speak in quieter tones. The oils aren't bubbling. They're resting. Even the resin pots sit untouched, as though waiting for something beyond the usual morning routine. You're guided into a dim chamber, where a small stone altar stands beside a low cot draped in linen. A single amphora of frankincense oil sits open, its scent curling like invisible smoke around the room. Today, You're learning how the Romans used perfume not just in life, but in death. In Roman culture, death wasn't a quiet exit. It was a performance, a procession, a farewell scented with ritual, and perfume was central to the drama. You approach the body laid out on the cot. It's been washed with warm water and wine, dried carefully, and now the perfumer begins anointing the skin with oils, slowly, deliberately, starting with the forehead, then down the arms, across the chest. This isn't just hygiene. It's sanctification. The dead were prepared as if going on a long journey. And in Rome, no respectable traveler, living or otherwise, would ever do so without a proper perfume. The most common oil used for funerary preparation was myrrh, blended with frankincense and a touch of cinnamon. Myrrh was believed to preserve, to bless, to honor. The scent was intense and a little bitter, as though mourning itself had a smell. Perfume was also burned during funeral rites. You watch as powdered resins are poured into a small bronze thymioterion, a ceremonial incense burner. The smoke spirals upward, toward the heavens. It's not just for the mourner's comfort. It's for the gods. The belief was that a fragrant offering helped guide the soul upward into the arms of the divine. And it wasn't cheap. A single funeral could use up oils and resins that cost more than the deceased's monthly salary, if they had one. For elites, this was the norm. For the poor, it was aspirational. Many scraped together funds to at least burn a little incense, even if the corpse went without lavish oils. Historians still argue whether these practices were rooted more in spiritual belief or social posturing. Some point to inscriptions suggesting that scent protected the soul. Others think it was simply another way to show status, even in death. If your tomb smelled like imported nard, you mattered. But perfume wasn't just for the corpse. Mourners wore it too. You watch as women dab their wrists with oil and press perfumed cloths to their faces, not to conceal their tears, but to show their participation in the ritual. It was a sensory way of saying, I was there. I grieved. I remember. You step back and follow the procession as it winds through the street. The scent of frankincense mixes with the dusty heat, the sweat of the bearers, and the flowers tossed by children. The coffin is draped in linen, but the scent wafting from it is unmistakable. Myrrh, cedar, perhaps even a touch of labdanum. They reach the pyre. The body is laid atop the wood, and more perfume is poured, this time directly into the flames. You hear the hiss as oil meets fire, see the billow of fragrant smoke rise like a final breath. It's strangely beautiful. Tragic, yes, but dignified. A farewell in scent. Later, you visit a tomb. It's small, family-owned, the kind a middle-class Roman might be buried in. Inside are urns, inscriptions, and a curious offering, a tiny vial, half filled with oil. You uncork it. The scent is faint, ghostly, but still there. Rose. Maybe iris. Maybe grief. You wonder if someone left it there long after the burial. A loved one. A friend. Perhaps someone who simply wanted the dead to have something beautiful in the afterlife. Back in the perfumery, you ask if they ever make special blends for the deceased. The answer surprises you. Of course, says the master blender. They deserve to be remembered as more than ash. They deserve to linger. She shows you a blend she's working on, Lacrima Nocturna or Night's Tear. It's a mix of cedar, spikenard, and violet root. Soft, earthy, evocative. You smell it and are instantly reminded of old parchment, dried leaves, and a candle snuffed in prayer. Fringe fact: some Roman tombs have yielded glass perfume bottles sealed with wax, still containing viscous drops of oil after centuries underground. It's like the dead tried to keep hold of their identity, one drop of scent at a time. In wealthier families, perfumes were also used to honor anniversaries of the dead. On certain days, relatives would visit tombs and re-anoint the urns, burn incense, and place fresh scented cloths over the gravestones. These rituals weren't morbid. They were comforting. Scent became memory, a way of keeping presence alive. You're shown a rare object, a carved ivory perfume applicator, shaped like a flower stem, used specifically for anointing statues of ancestors. It's delicate, worn smooth by generations of fingers. You hold it in your hand and imagine all the tiny, reverent gestures it carried through time. Then there's the belief in manes, the spirits of the dead who, if pleased, brought luck and protection. Offerings of wine, grain, and perfume were left for them regularly. If you ever forgot, expect creaky floors, sudden chills, or maybe a haunting that smelled faintly of offended sandalwood. You lie back again as the last light of day softens the chamber. The fire crackles low, scenting the air with the last of the day's galbanum and rosewood. You think of all the scents that have come and gone, on skin, in fire, in ritual, and how, somehow, they've lasted. Even in death, the Romans knew this truth. We may not live forever, but perhaps, with the right oil and a careful hand, our scent can. You wake to hushed voices, not reverent, not mournful, but sharp, fast, and just slightly suspicious. The scent in the air is no longer floral or soothing. It's sharper, earthier. There's cinnamon, yes, but also a hint of something wilder, animalic. You're not in the perfumery anymore. You're in the back alleys of the Roman marketplace, and you're about to discover something the official recipe tablets never mention. Perfume, real perfume, the good stuff, was expensive. And wherever there's value, there's a black market. You duck beneath a hanging cloth and find yourself in a shadowy side booth run by a man with one eyebrow and three chins. Looking for something rare? He asks, wagging a pinky ring encrusted with nard resin. He reaches beneath the table and pulls out a clay jar wrapped in goat leather. Genuine Nardinum syriacum, he whispers, straight from the mountains. You remove the stopper. It smells a bit like vinegar and pine tar. It needs to breathe, he insists. You suspect it needs a refund. That's the problem with the perfume trade in ancient Rome. For every reputable workshop, there were 10 vendors selling knockoffs. Myrrh diluted with wine, cinnamon oil cut with almond extract, and the legendary spikenard, often faked with local weeds soaked in saffron tea. Spikenard came from the Himalayas, impossibly far, dangerously transported, absurdly priced. A single vial could cost more than a month's rent in a nice Roman villa. Naturally, everyone wanted a piece. You wander past a row of mules tethered to carts stacked with amphorae. The air smells like a confusing blend of sandalwood and donkey fur. That's no accident. These animals are carrying perfume ingredients, some legally imported, others smuggled in bags of grain, folded into layers of dried fish, or disguised as olive oil. You pass a merchant who winks at you and drops a small jar into your palm. Frankincense? You ask. Sure, he replies. Let's go with that. Fringe fact? Smuggling perfume ingredients wasn't just about avoiding taxes. Some items, like musk and rare balsams, were controlled substances. Too valuable, too limited. Only licensed traders, or the emperor's inner circle, had the right to import them officially. The rest? They got creative. Historians still argue whether Roman customs officials were actually effective or just easily bribed with a half bottle of halfway decent rose oil. Some inscriptions suggest harsh penalties for illegal imports. Others show that, conveniently, no one ever seemed to get caught. You stroll into a shipping yard where a perfumer is examining barrels labeled wine. The moment one is cracked open, the scent says otherwise. Storax resin, he mutters approvingly. From Phoenicia. Not bad. The trick, you learn, is blending it with a touch of local pine so it passes through scent checks without raising suspicion. Even the perfumes themselves were trafficked. A finished bottle of luxury oil might be sold in Alexandria, rebottled in Crete, diluted in Cyprus, and end up on a Roman shelf labeled exclusive blend, direct from Arabia. You check a bottle and find the wax seal uneven. The stopper is crooked. The scent? Suspiciously lemony. Definitely a counterfeit. Still, not all smugglers were criminals in the traditional sense. Some were scent evangelists, people so devoted to a particular oil or method that they'd risk the sea, the soldiers, and the smell of moldy ship hulls just to get it into the city. One woman you meet, her tunic crusted with salt, tells you she brought 6 pounds of frankincense hidden inside hollowed-out loaves of bread. 3 got eaten, she shrugs. The rest? Pure profit. You find yourself in a makeshift lab behind a spice vendor's stall. 2 teenagers are cooking down a bundle of crushed herbs, adding drops of cassia oil from a flask with no label. They're trying to mimic a famous scent, succinum, the Egyptian lily perfume. Their version uses dried rose petals, cinnamon water, and, alarming twist, fermented quince. They let you smell it. It's not terrible. Floral. Fruity. Slightly vinegary. One of them grins. Better than the temple stuff. And cheaper. You nod, but quietly note the faint aroma of desperation. Counterfeit perfume wasn't always obvious, though. Some shops sold aged oils by darkening new blends with soot. Others recycled used containers, pouring in fresh oil and calling it vintage. One trick was to bury a jar in the ground for a week, let it absorb earthy notes, then pass it off as imported. You watch this being done by a man who insists, no one smells the dirt. They smell the story. Back in the official perfume district, the reputable shops sniff warily at these underhanded competitors. One merchant tells you that last week, a senator bought fake saffron oil and showed up at the Senate smelling like moldy turnips. He blamed us, she growls, as if we'd ever sell saffron that smelled like soup stock. Some perfumers tried to protect their blends by using signature ingredients, like a single drop of imported kiffy or a note of cedar smoke, so precise only the original maker could produce it. Others carved their initials into the glass bottles, or sealed them with colored wax known only to their patrons. You're handed such a bottle now, deep blue glass, sealed in crimson wax with a pressed medallion of a lion. The shopkeeper leans close. This is my bestseller. And yes, they've tried to copy it, but they always miss the camphor. Never forget the camphor. Fringe detail, some perfume forgers got very bold. One scroll fragment tells of a man who used ashes from burned scrolls. Yes, actual literature ashes, to darken his oil and claim it was made with sacred temple smoke. A fraud, a poet, possibly both. By the time you leave the shadow market, your nose is overwhelmed. Real, fake, imported, improvised. Everything smells like power and deception. You lean against a wall and let it all fade for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, a girl walks past you. She's wearing something simple, just oil of marjoram and a trace of clove. But it's clean, balanced, and honest. It cuts through all the noise like a clear note in a messy song. You smile. Even in a world of forgeries and fakes, real beauty still rises. You're back in familiar territory now, or so you think. The bathhouse looms ahead, steam rising like spirits from the tiled roofs. You pass through its arched entrance, and immediately you're swallowed by a wave of heat and something else. Something more luxurious. Spicier. The unmistakable cloud of communal perfume. Roman bathhouses weren't just places to get clean. They were hubs of gossip, networking, and the daily olfactory arms race. If you smelled faintly of sweat and ambition walking in, you left drenched in scented oil and social currency. You stroll into the apodyterium, the changing room, where tunics hang in neat, slightly damp rows. Already, someone's applying oil near the fountain, rubbing their arms with a blend of lavender, coriander, and something smoky. Probably cedar. It smells good. Really good. You almost forget you're barefoot on stone floors that have definitely seen too many feet. From there, you move to the tepidarium, the warm room. The heat isn't stifling, just enveloping. You sit on a stone bench, and the scents begin to swirl. Rosemary, clove, dried orange peel. One man is fanning himself with a sprig of mint, not for temperature, but because mint enhances concentration. You're not sure it's working, but he smells like a mojito and seems very focused. In the caldarium, the hot room, the scent intensifies. People sweat out yesterday's wine and today's ambitions. Before soap, Romans used strigils, curved metal scrapers to remove oil, dirt, and whatever the street left behind. But here's the twist. Before scraping, they rubbed on oil. Generously. Scented, of course. You watch as a burly man applies a mixture of myrrh, pine resin, and what he claims is imported nardinum. You're skeptical, but the result is impressive. He glistens like a glazed amphora, and even the elder beside him raises an eyebrow in approval. Fringe fact? Some wealthier bathhouses offered scented steam rooms. They'd toss herbs and resins onto heated stones, turning the air into a perfumed sauna. Rosemary for clarity, bay leaves for bravery, sage if you were feeling insecure about your Senate speech. You pass into the frigidarium, the cold plunge, where brave bathers dunk themselves into marble pools and emerge with yelps and curses. Even here, there's a scent, mint again, maybe camphor. A few thrill seekers add drops of oil to the water just before jumping in. Scented shock therapy. Back in the massage rooms, things get even more fragrant. Here, the perfumers do brisk trade. Tiny oil flasks dangle from belts like tools. A typical massage might include 4 or 5 oils and layers. First to warm the skin, then to loosen muscles, then to leave a long-lasting scent trail. You watch one woman mix a custom blend right on the spot. She starts with olive oil, adds 3 drops of balsam, a drop of iris, and then, carefully, a pinch of crushed myrtle. The client grunts. Too floral. She nods, adjusts, adds coriander. The new blend smells sharper, like a forest in summer. Approved. You get the sense that here, scent is both armor and offering. People wear it into the social arena, whether they're here to broker trade deals, spread rumors, or flirt shamelessly. There's even a table near the exit stacked with scented cloths, for those who didn't bring their own. You pick one up, rosewater and saffron. Subtle, confident. One man strolls past wearing a blend that smells oddly, smoky, like incense and bacon. He notices your reaction and grins. Frankincense and juniper, he says, for boldness. You try not to laugh, but the image of him giving a speech while smelling like divine breakfast is too much. Historians still debate whether the bathhouse scents were strictly personal or if there were institutional blends, the equivalent of Roman brand body wash. Some excavations suggest certain bathhouses used signature blends, especially the larger thermi, to distinguish themselves and attract loyal clientele. Imagine, come to Marcus's Baths, now with added lavender rose fusion. You're shown a basket of tiny glass bottles, each with a symbol etched into the side. One has a dolphin, another a palm leaf. These were scent tokens, given to regular patrons, exchanged like business cards. Trade you my pine myrtle for your cinnamon violet? A scent economy. You overhear a heated discussion between 2 young men. One claims basil is the perfect post-bath scent, clean, masculine, versatile. The other scoffs. Too kitchen. He argues for marjoram and citrus. It says cultured, but not desperate. A woman nearby rolls her eyes and says, just use time and get on with it. You like her. You head toward the exit, past the laundry area where towels are being boiled in herbal infusions. Even the linens smell like intention. You spot a small vial labeled Oleum morbi, a sickroom blend, lavender, chamomile, and garlic, meant to ward off both illness and bad vibes. You don't touch it. Fringe fact? Some bathhouses employed unctors, specialized perfumers who only worked in the baths. Their job was to read your mood, your body, your skin, and apply the right blend. Like spa therapists crossed with fortune tellers. As you dry off and prepare to leave, you catch one last interaction. A senator's wife complaining that her usual oil supplier watered down the iris again. I'll smell like a hedge, she mutters. Her slave assures her a replacement is on the way, one with double the saffron, and maybe a drop of ambergris if they can find it. You walk out into the late afternoon air. The sun is lower now. Your skin is warm, your muscles relaxed, and your scent, well, a little bit of everything. Bay, lemon, possibly a trace of someone else's cedar smoke. But you don't mind. This is how Romans carried their identity. Layered, complex, blended through sweat, oil, and ritual. You may have come to clean your body, but you leave perfumed like someone who's arrived. The city hums as you step away from the bathhouse, clean, relaxed, and exuding the confident tang of rosemary, iris, and just a suspicious touch of someone else's saffron. The streets are quieter now. The marketplace is winding down. But the perfume show? That never stops. Not here in Rome, where who you smell like is just as important as how you smell. You wander toward the domus of a wealthy merchant. His name isn't important. What matters is that he throws dinner parties where scent does more talking than the guests. Tonight, you're lucky enough to attend. The atrium is lined with perfumed torches. No, really. They've soaked the torch wicks in a resinous oil blend so that even fire smells like wealth. Inside, soft drapes hang heavy with incense. You brush past one and get a whiff of spikenard and something fruity, fig maybe. A servant greets you with a nod and a scented towel. Bay leaf and mint. Refreshing. You dab your wrists. It feels like a contract. This isn't a feast. It's branding. Romans knew how to make an entrance. You watch as guests arrive, each announcing themselves with a personal scent. One woman breezes in smelling like lilies and cedar. Elegant, sharp, impossible to ignore. A senator's nephew shows up cloaked in heavy cinnamon and myrrh. It says, I inherited money and want you to know. Another guest? rose water with a touch of vinegar. Either he's modest, or forgot to check his amphora's expiration date. The host, naturally, outshines them all. His perfume is a masterpiece. You inhale deeply. There's saffron, yes, but also smoky benzoin, something citrusy and crisp, and a musky, grounding note that might be labdanum. He probably paid a perfumer to blend it just for him. You're told it's called aurum veritas, golden truth. You try not to roll your eyes. But it does smell pretty amazing. The couches are lightly dusted with powdered rose petals. The wine? Flavored with a few drops of iris extract. The air itself is perfumed. Servants wave fans dipped in floral water. And the food? Let's just say a little cinnamon sneaks into the duck. And yes, the olives have been gently soaked in myrrh-infused oil. Everything is fragrant. Everything is curated. This is not a party. It's a performance. Fringe fact? Some elite Romans hired professional scent consultants before parties. These advisors helped select a blend that matched the host's personality, the season, even the expected guest list. Citrus for summer, myrrh for gravitas, musk for political intimidation. You hear murmurs from a corner about a recent scandal, someone accused of wearing peasant perfume at the governor's banquet. Apparently, the blend used too much marjoram and smelled like soup. Social suicide. One woman hisses that he hasn't been invited anywhere since. Her own scent? A tasteful mix of chamomile and spikenard. Neutral but intelligent, she explains. Like a well-behaved poem. Historians still debate whether perfumes functioned as rigid social markers or more flexible self-expression tools. Some say there were rules. Rose for widows, myrtle for brides, myrrh for diplomats. Others argue people used whatever smelled expensive and traveled well. But what's clear is this: scent was never neutral. It meant something. You spot a group of young men laughing over wine. They're debating who wore the best perfume at the last Ludi, the games. One insists it was a gladiator scented with vetiver and ash. He smelled like thunder, he says dreamily. Another counters with a charioteer who wore a citrus blend that made your heart race. You pretend not to notice the merchant's daughter listening in, eyebrows raised. Later, a poet stands to recite a verse. His tunic is stained with ink, and he smells faintly of pine and cheap incense. Nobody really listens, until he ends his recitation with a quote from Catullus about the way a lover's scent lingers longer than their touch. The room sighs. Someone claps. Even the host seems impressed. Perfume wasn't just worn at parties, it was the party. It set the mood, triggered memories, created alliances. You notice two guests leaning close, sniffing each other's necks like curious cats. It's not flirtation, necessarily. It's decoding. Everyone wants to know, what blend are you? You're offered a dab of something from a tiny, etched glass bottle. The label says Umbra Veneni, shadow of the poison. Dramatic. You take a whiff. It's dark, sultry, maybe too sultry. Definitely has galbanum. Possibly betrayal. You pass. Even the dining plates have been lightly rubbed with perfumed wax to mask any undesirable smells from the food. Not that the food needs help. It's drenched in herbs and oils. Every course arrives scented like a message: opulence, delicacy, control. By dessert, the room is thick with scent. You can barely tell where one person's perfume ends and the next begins. It's a dreamscape of sandalwood, hyacinth, anise, and human warmth. A sensory soup of ambition and almonds. And yet, somehow, no one here seems overwhelmed. They've trained for this. Romans developed scent stamina, just like they trained for rhetoric, or swordplay, or enduring awful poetry over wine. One guest passes you a perfumed cloth to wipe your hands. It smells faintly of ambergris. You blink. Imported? You ask. She nods smugly. It traveled farther than most of the guests. Fringe fact? Ambergris. Yes, the whale stuff was so rare and costly that it was sometimes traded for its weight in silver. And despite its odd origins, Romans used it in perfumes, medicine, and possibly even food. Because of course they did. As the night winds down, guests begin to leave. One by one, they slip into the night, leaving a trail of scent in their wake. Some are subtle, like a half-remembered memory. Others hit like the last chorus of a tragic play. The doorway hums with floral ghosts. You step outside too, blinking in the night air. It's cooler, cleaner. The scent on your own skin has shifted. It's layered now. Your original oil, mingled with party aromas, traces of cedar couch and fig-stained fingertips. You pass someone on the street, and they pause. "What's that you're wearing?" they ask. You shrug. Survival. Because in Rome, your scent isn't just a fragrance. It's your resume. You wake before dawn, the city still quiet, wrapped in shadows and the low murmur of early risers. Today, you're heading somewhere special, not to a perfumery, not to a party, but to a place frozen in time. You follow a dusty road away from Rome itself, along the ancient Via Appia, until finally, rising through the fog like a stage set, you arrive at Pompeii. Before the eruption, before the silence, when scent still ruled here. You walk past the old gates, through narrow streets paved with volcanic stone, past frescoes still vivid with color, figs, birds, little gods mid-wink. And yes, you can smell it. Not the ash, not the sulfur, but something else. Ghosts of perfume still linger here. In oil-stained walls, in broken jars, in memory. Your first stop is a small, crumbling shop off the Via dell'Abbondanza. It's a Falonica, a laundromat and perfumery hybrid. The Romans had a genius for multitasking. One room was for washing tunics with clay and urine, don't ask. The next for perfuming freshly cleaned fabric with spiced oils. You crouch beside a sunken vat where they used to mix a popular blend, rose, coriander, and iris. Practical and pretty. In the corner of this shop, archaeologists found tiny glass ampoules sealed with wax. Some still carried residues, thick, sticky traces of what might have once been spikenard oil. You imagine someone sealing those bottles the night before the eruption, thinking about delivery routes, or tomorrow's blend, or whether they'd finally perfect their sweetener mixture. You step next into the famous house of the Vedii. The murals here are decadent. Dionysus, cupids, fruit baskets. In the atrium, you find a perfume shelf carved directly into the wall. It's a simple alcove, easy to miss, but beneath the dust lies a stain, a faint circle where oil once pooled. The scent's long gone, but something in your brain still tries to find it. Frankincense, iris root, hope. Then there's the domus of Julia Felix. She was rich, very rich. Her villa was practically a mall, baths, shops, gardens. And yes, a perfume production room. Archaeologists found amphorae marked with symbols for galbanum and balsam. Nearby, a mosaic shows a servant pouring something into a dish while a woman lounges on a couch, surrounded by vials. You don't need a caption. You know what that dish contains. Fringe fact? Some Pompeian murals depict winged figures carrying perfume flasks, literal spirits of scent. One image shows a nymph anointing Venus herself, and beneath it, an inscription reads, "She who smells sweetly, rules sweetly." Iconic. You pause at the remnants of a small stall near the forum. This was once a shop selling oils and unguents. The plaster behind the counter is stained in streaks of dark ochre. A sign, some believe, that jars once rested here for years, their contents slowly seeping into the walls. The scent may be gone, but the color remains. Historians still argue whether perfume was manufactured in Pompeii or just sold there. Some claim the coastal city was a scent hub, importing raw materials from the east and blending them locally. Others say it was more of a distribution point. But the evidence, residue analysis, inscriptions, even graffiti, suggests that scent wasn't just present in Pompeii. It thrived. Speaking of graffiti, you find some, scrawled on a bakery wall, barely visible in the light. "I love the smell of Tullia more than her bread." It's not exactly Shakespeare, but it says everything. Even in casual flirtation, scent came first. Later, in the storage chambers of the Macellum, the central market, you stumble upon sealed clay pots once believed to contain fish sauce. But under chemical analysis, not fish, not even food. It was perfume oil, likely spoiled after the eruption. Researchers found traces of cedar and galbanum. You imagine some poor merchant sniffing his delivery and realizing he'd been given cooking oil instead of myrrh. Ancient supply chain problems. You pass an alleyway where a collapsed structure was later revealed to be a small perfumer's workshop. They found crushed rose petals pressed between layers of volcanic debris, a stone grinding slab, a scoop carved from bone, and most haunting of all, a partially sealed amphora, still intact, its contents hardened but preserved. Inside that jar was a blend of oil and resin that no one's been able to identify. Not fully, It doesn't match known recipes. Some believe it was a custom blend. Others think it was experimental. You like to believe it was someone's magnum opus, unfinished, unnamed, and buried mid-stir. The streets of Pompeii whisper. You smell everything and nothing. You crouch near a fountain where someone once washed away a failed batch. You lean against a doorway where a client may have stood, waiting to pick up a vial for a romantic evening, or a religious ceremony, or just to feel special walking through the crowd. Fringe fact? Some women in Pompeii were buried with perfume bottles sealed shut. Their contents have never been opened. Not out of caution, but respect. To unseal the scent, some archaeologists say, would be to awaken the dead. The wind kicks up dust as you pass under a colonnade. The sun catches something sparkling in the stone, glass fragments from a broken vial. You pick one up. It's iridescent, curved, feather-light. You imagine the last hands to hold it. Were they steady? Nervous? Joyful? You leave Pompeii slowly, back along the Via Appia. The perfume is gone now, burned or buried. But somehow, you still carry it. In your skin, your breath, the space behind your eyes. Because some scents don't fade. They just wait. You're back in Rome, but your feet don't lead you to a perfumery or a bathhouse today. Instead, they carry you through towering columns, echoing courtyards, and up the worn marble steps of a grand temple. The air here is cooler, heavier, scented, but not with roses or nard. This is a different kind of perfume, one meant not for seduction or celebration, but for the gods. Religion in ancient Rome wasn't just about belief. It was ritual, tradition, performance. And at the center of many of those rituals, scent, divine scent, fragrance as a language of reverence. As you enter the Templum Iovis Optimus Maximus, the grand temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, you smell it instantly. Not perfume as you know it, but incense. Rich, smoky, commanding. Frankincense and myrrh, mostly. Resin chunks tossed onto glowing coals, their fumes rising like prayer made visible. You edge closer to the altar, where a priest slowly circles with a bronze censer. With each pass, he releases another wave of aroma. Your eyes sting a little. Your chest tightens. It's powerful, almost too much. But that's the point. You feel this scent. Deep. Physical. It demands your attention. Your all. Romans believed the gods had noses. Not literally, perhaps, but metaphorically. A pleasing aroma was a pleasing offering. A foul smell, on the other hand, that could offend the divine. And no one wanted an offended Jupiter. Lightning bolts and all. Fringe fact? Temples weren't just cleaned daily, they were deodorized. Priests burned juniper, bay, and rosemary to purify the space. One ancient recipe calls for a mix of 5 woods and 4 herbs to drive out malodorous spirits. They didn't just fear demons. They feared stench. You sit near a stone bench as a boy sets out a small bowl of crushed iris root mixed with wine. It will be poured over the altar as a liquid offering, libatio. You lean in. It smells faintly sweet, like spiced grape and dry earth. Not delicious, but sacred. Perfume was used in processions, too. During public festivals like the Ludi Romani or the Saturnalia, statues of the gods were carried through the streets, anointed with scented oils. You imagine the golden image of Jupiter himself rolling past on a cart, glistening with saffron oil, surrounded by drummers and flower-throwing children. And the people? They prepare too. You watch as a woman dabs her wrists with a soft blend of myrrh and chamomile before entering the Temple of Vesta. She believes it pleases the goddess of hearth and home. Maybe it does. Maybe it just calms her nerves. Either way, the act matters. In another temple, this one smaller, tucked behind a line of shops, you witness something different. A private offering. A young man kneels before a statue of Venus, pouring oil onto a small flame. The scent that wafts up is floral, intoxicating, likely rose and honey resin. It fills the cramped space with something too tender to be explained. He doesn't speak. He just breathes it in, eyes closed. Historians still debate whether scent itself was considered a form of prayer or merely a vehicle for offerings. Some argue that the smoke acted as a kind of divine messenger, carrying human wishes upward. Others say the fragrance was a way to demonstrate respect, because what better way to honor a goddess than with the rarest, most beautiful scent you could afford? You peek into the storeroom behind one of the temples. Jars are stacked high, some labeled with neat wax seals. Cedar oil, spikenard, storax. One container, tied with red string, holds a mixture so potent it makes your head spin. Cinnamon, pepper, myrrh, and something musky. Temple blend, the priest says quietly. Reserved for the dies natalis, the deity's birthday. Scent marked sacred time. Just as you wear perfume for a party, the gods expected it on their special days. Miss the date? Show up with old oil. That's the kind of error that gets you cursed with bad crops and public shame. One older priest confides that he's spent his life perfecting a specific blend for Mars, the god of war. It needs to smell like courage, he says, but also restraint. His latest version includes galbanum, oak moss, and a drop of iron-infused vinegar. It's harsh, bold. You're not sure you'd wear it, but it definitely gets your blood moving. Fringe detail? Some Romans believed certain scents could summon the gods. A specific blend of frankincense and saffron was said to draw Apollo's attention. Burn the wrong resin? You risked confusing your prayers, or worse, attracting the wrong god. You sit at the edge of a lectisternium, a feast for the gods where statues are laid out on couches and served food and wine. The bread is real. The wine is real. The perfume? Poured in abundance over the guests. You watch as one man gently anoints a statue's feet with oil. The scent is vanilla and myrrh, rich, cloying. He whispers a prayer as he works, eyes shining. Later, you find yourself in a temple garden. Laurel trees rustle. Bees drift lazily through the thyme. A small altar sits under an arch. This is for the Lares, household spirits. A woman approaches with her daughter, who carries a bowl of saffron petals. She scatters them slowly, reverently, then dabs her own wrist with a worn cloth. The scent is faint but familiar. Lavender. It smells like bedtime. Because yes, Romans brought perfume into the home, too. They anointed statues, sprinkled thresholds, even perfumed their hearths on festival days. And the belief? A sweet-smelling home was a protected home. Fragrance was more than luxury. It was defense. As the sun starts to sink, you hear chanting from a small temple up the hill. You climb the steps slowly, letting the blend of resins hit you in waves. Clove, sandalwood, olive oil. You don't need to understand the words. The scent says enough. This is sacred. This is memory. This is Rome reaching beyond itself. You close your eyes and breathe in. And you wonder, did the gods really smell all this? Or did the Romans just want to believe they did? The temples are behind you now, but your nose is still tuned to their sacred notes. Myrrh, frankincense, saffron. As you walk through a shaded garden, birds flutter from fig tree to fig tree, and something odd catches your attention. A very well-groomed dog struts past, tail high, fur gleaming, and he smells like roses. You pause, and then it hits you. This isn't a fluke. This is on purpose. Welcome to the strangest corner of Roman luxury, perfumed pets. Yes, the same citizens who bathed in saffron, anointed statues with galbanum, and debated the moral merits of cinnamon oil, also dabbed lily water behind their dogs' ears. Some went further. Doves, monkeys, even parrots were known to get the scented treatment. Because if your dinner guests didn't smell your wealth, maybe your parrot could tell them. You wander into a villa where one of these eccentric pet owners resides. She greets you with a small gray monkey perched on her shoulder. Coated, she says proudly, in a delicate blend of lavender and quince. You extend a hand. The monkey sniffs it, then snubs you. Elite behavior, truly. There's a small silver tray laid out near the aviary. On it are bottles of oil marked with symbols, feathers, paws, wings. This isn't a joke. It's an entire system. Birds prefer lighter notes, the woman explains. Dogs can handle myrrh. Cats, chamomile, if they'll let you. You walk through the garden, and there's a dog curled lazily beneath a bay laurel bush. Someone has brushed his fur with rose petal paste. He yawns and stretches, smelling like an apology bouquet. Fringe fact? The Roman poet Martial once mocked a wealthy man for perfuming his dog while wearing rancid oil himself. Even your mutt has more dignity than your nose, he wrote. Savage. Historians still argue whether perfuming animals was a widespread habit or a fringe fad of the ultra-wealthy. Some dismiss it as poetic exaggeration. Others point to archaeological finds, tiny combs, perfume flasks, and even mosaic depictions of well-groomed pets, to argue otherwise. One mosaic in particular shows a woman brushing oil into a rabbit's fur. Not exactly evidence, but not nothing, either. You're led now to a banquet hall where today's entertainment is in full swing. A trained parrot perches atop a golden stand, repeating the phrase, Bibbo vinum, oleo me and go. I drink wine. I anoint myself with oil. The guests howl with laughter. You do not. The parrot smells oddly nice, like violets and pear. Backstage, you find a servant brushing scented oil onto the wings of a dove. For the release ceremony, she explains. They circle the atrium once and return to their cages. You ask if it's for the gods. She scoffs. It's for the drama. It wasn't always just pets, either. Romans perfumed everything. Fabric, armor, curtains, writing scrolls. Some even perfumed their sandals, so that with every step, a waft of scent followed. But perfumed animals? That's a statement. A declaration that you've gone beyond scented skin and scented rooms, into scented companions. In the villa kitchen, you meet a cook preparing a dessert that includes perfumed honey. Not just for flavor, for scent. If the plate doesn't smell like the garden, he explains, the dish is incomplete. You watch him drizzle honey infused with rose oil over figs stuffed with nuts and spikenard. The result smells sweet, but oddly floral. Dessert and perfume at once. Fringe detail? Some Romans believed dogs could detect bad perfume from good. There are anecdotes about animals growling at wearers of inferior oil blends. Whether true or not, that didn't stop owners from slathering their pets with expensive imports. After all, if Fido smells like a senator, maybe you'll be mistaken for one, too. Later, you meet a merchant who imports animal-safe perfume blends. His display includes Feather Fresh for birds, Gentle Paw for dogs, and Feline Fleur for cats. You ask if he makes anything for humans. Not anymore, he says, dead serious. Too picky. You walk through the city with a strange new awareness. That rustling behind the market stall? Probably a perfumed ferret. That cooing dove by the fountain? Smells like lily water. That man's toga? Still faintly citrusy, but the parrot on his arm? Smells better. You step into a perfumery offering a mixed anointing service. People and pets alike are treated. A woman is having her wrists dabbed with citrus and amber while her white dog gets a balm massaged into his ears. The dog looks smug. The woman looks tired. He gets compliments, she sighs. I get accused of copying his scent. There's a quiet lesson in all this. Roman perfume wasn't just about human expression. It was about projection. Your scent extended beyond your body, your clothes, your walls. It enveloped your world. If your dog smelled of roses, that said something about you. Maybe that you were wealthy. Maybe that you were ridiculous. Or maybe, just maybe, that you believed beauty should touch everything. One elderly man tells you, almost in a whisper, that his late wife used to scent their pigeons before releasing them on anniversaries. They smelled like violets and cinnamon, he says. She said it helped the prayers fly faster. You don't know what to say? So you nod. And quietly, you believe her. As you leave the villa, the monkey jumps back on his perch and glares at you. You're not sure what he smells like now. Maybe something musky and floral, but whatever it is, it's strangely dignified. You take a deep breath. And for the first time, you don't know whether what you're inhaling is meant for humans or animals. But in ancient Rome, what's the difference? If it has a nose, it gets perfume. You step out into the early dusk, belly full of honeyed figs and parrot songs still echoing faintly in your head. But tonight, you're headed somewhere quieter, less scented silk and perfumed monkey fur, and more stone, scrolls, and speculation. Welcome to the strange world of Roman scent science. Or, perhaps more accurately, Roman scent guesswork, with just enough logic to feel clever and just enough incense smoke to feel like a fever dream. You're in the study of a philosopher perfumer. Yes, that was a thing. At least, in this case, it's a man who reads Pliny, burns resins, and insists that beeswax has energetic memory. You perch on a wooden bench surrounded by scrolls and glass bottles, each flask labeled in Latin, Greek, and the occasional doodle of a leaf or goat. He's brewing something as you enter. Observe, he says, pouring oil into a shallow bronze pan. As fire alters not the nature of rose, but reveals it. You nod slowly. That sounds wise. Or maybe it's just hot oil talking. Roman perfumery straddled art and pseudoscience. The ingredients were real. The methods, extraction, infusion, evaporation, were grounded in experience. But the theories? Often hilariously wrong. One popular belief: the warm oils, like cinnamon, myrrh, and cassia, stimulated the humors, especially blood and yellow bile. Meanwhile, cool scents like mint and iris soothed melancholy. Scent, in this worldview, was medicine, not just aromatherapy, actual physiology in oil form. You're handed a mixture said to calm the liver. It smells like coriander, chamomile, and possibly wet wool. You pretend to inhale deeply and nod with mock reverence. The perfumer beams. Fringe fact: some Roman thinkers believed scent particles traveled on airs of influence, invisible threads from plant to brain. They speculated that the soul recognized certain odors from before birth, especially if the scent came from near a sacred spring. Yes, prenasal nostalgia was a theory. Historians still argue whether Roman scent science deserves the title. Was it proto-chemistry, or just poetic fumbling? Some methods, like maceration and enfleurage, were sound and still used in modern perfumery. Others, like storing oils under moonlight or shouting prayers into amphorae, are, let's call them, extra. You flip through a parchment scroll illustrated with diagrams. One shows the four scent natures: pungent, heat, sweet, moisture, bitter, earth, and a fourth that's just labeled snake. No further explanation. You decide not to ask. In one corner of the room sits a sealed clay jar marked oleum fulguratum, lightning-struck oil. Apparently, it was olive oil pressed from trees hit by lightning, thought to enhance memory and libido. Whether from actual scientific testing or just thunder-induced terror is unclear. You're shown a wax tablet with a recipe for what the perfumer calls the eternal blend, an oil mix that supposedly doesn't go rancid. The secret? The perfect triangle of rose, iris, and storax. You try it. It does smell oddly preserved, floral, slightly spicy, like an ancient memory sealed in beeswax. A young apprentice nearby is trying to mix oils with wine. The result is an unpleasant fizzing sound and a smell like heartbreak in a pantry. Not every experiment succeeds. The perfumer says gently. The apprentice looks devastated. You pat his shoulder. He now smells like vinegar and regret. One of the more bizarre beliefs you learn is the echo of scent theory, that certain scents leave behind vibrations in a room, influencing the next blend made there. That's why some perfumers built separate rooms for each blend. It wasn't superstition. It was olfactory feng shui. You're led to a garden behind the study. Here, rows of herbs are grown under specific conditions. Rosemary near stones to absorb heat, mint near water for clarity. The perfumer claims that where a plant grows affects its aromatic truth. You lean in to sniff the rosemary. It smells like rosemary, but with a tiny hint of crushed ambition. Fringe detail: beeswax was considered spiritually clean, and some believed it captured not just scent, but intention. A well-meaning blend stuck better to beeswax. Angry oil? It resisted. This belief caused more than one Roman to yell compliments at a cooling bomb just in case. You move inside again, just in time to witness the grand theory of oil gendering. Don't worry, it's not what you think. In this system, resins were masculine, earthy, forceful. Florals were feminine, delicate, seductive. And some ingredients, like vetiver or labdanum, were ambiguous. Those, the perfumer assures you, do the work of balance. You resist the urge to draw astrological symbols on his amphorae. As the night deepens, the scrolls get stranger. You find one with a recipe that includes ambergris, ash from burned poetry scrolls, and a drop of bull's blood. For war, the note reads. You quietly roll it back up and put it at the bottom of the stack. One scroll, however, stops you in your tracks. It describes a lost oil known as fumus quietus, smoke of stillness, said to induce dreams, lower heart rate, and calm the wind in the chest. The ingredients are faded, just a smear of ink. But you wonder, could it be recreated? Historians today are still trying to reverse engineer Roman blends using residue analysis and ancient texts. Some perfumes have been successfully reproduced. Others remain mysteries, ghosts of scent lost to time and chemistry. You lie back on a cushion while the perfumer extinguishes the lamps with a pinch of iris ash. The room goes dark, but not scentless. The air still holds the notes of rose, resin, and worn-out theory. And as you drift off, you realize something. Romans didn't just use perfume. They thought in perfume. They dreamed in layers of scent. built philosophies around it, tried to map the soul through smell. And in that mix of logic and longing, trial and error, petals and prayer, they got close. Close enough to make you believe that maybe scent is knowledge, too. It's late now. You've wandered from temples to bathhouses, from black market spice dealers to philosophers whispering to beeswax. But there's one place left to visit before this perfume dream ends. A quiet storeroom, a shadowy archive, a place where old scents go to sleep. You enter through a narrow doorway, tucked between two shuttered stalls on a forgotten Roman street. The air is dry here. Still, the kind of silence that makes your nose work harder, trying to remember what the room used to smell like. And sure enough, you catch something faint. Old cedar, dried figure, a whisper of myrrh. This is where scent history lives. Not in scrolls or statues, but in amphorae. Some cracked, some sealed, some still holding onto their last sacred drops. You kneel beside a shelf lined with bottles, each labeled in fading ink: Succinum, Soprinum, Nardinum, names like forgotten songs. You gently uncork one. The scent that escapes is barely there, like the ghost of a garden. Lily, faint rose, and something smoky underneath. You close your eyes. It's old. It's tired. But it's still trying. That's the thing about Roman perfume. It was never built to last 2,000 years. And yet, in tiny traces, it has. You find a crate marked with the emblem of a famous Capuan workshop. Inside, blotting cloths still stiff with residue. The perfumers back then used them to test blends. The cloths were tossed aside, forgotten. Now, they're treasure. Scientists today test them using gas chromatography. But you just lift one to your face and inhale. And it smells like nothing you've ever smelled before. Like sweet soil. Like citrus blossoms aging in the dark. Like time in liquid form. Historians still debate whether these residues are true to the original scent, or if centuries of mineral seepage and air exposure have rewritten the recipe. But even if the notes have shifted, the intention is there. It's not about accuracy. It's about legacy. One scroll in a sealed jar holds a recipe that ends in a strange phrase: for when the empire fades. It's unclear whether it was meant to preserve the perfume or preserve the memory of perfume. You like to think it's the latter. You move to a different shelf. These amphorae are dusty but unbroken. They've been found in tombs, shipwrecks, collapsed storerooms. One was pulled from a ruined villa after an earthquake. It had sat undisturbed for centuries, sealed with pitch and wax, wrapped in linen, labeled Aurum Somni, gold of sleep. You crack it open, gently, and the scent that escapes is rich, warm, comforting. Amber, maybe. A hint of pine, some kind of sweet root. You breathe it in slowly, and for a second, the room softens. The walls melt away. You're not in a forgotten Roman cellar anymore. You're in a dream. This was the final goal of so many perfumers. Not fame, not fortune, but memory. To outlive their own bodies through scent. To be inhaled by strangers centuries later and recognized, without name, without voice, just through the skin of the air. You find one last jar. No label, no markings, just a cork. You hesitate, then open it. And nothing. No scent. Not even oil. Just dust. And yet, somehow, it's the most emotional moment of all. Because even empty, the vessel remembers. This was someone's favorite blend. Someone's work. Someone's evening ritual or lover's gift. And though it's gone, the silence it leaves behind is fragrant in its own way. Fringe fact? In some ancient Roman cemeteries, amphorae were buried with no oil inside, intentionally. Scholars think these were symbolic offerings. The absence of scent as a gesture of mourning. An olfactory tombstone. You sit there, surrounded by bottles, cloths, scrolls, jars, dust. And for the first time, you feel the weight of every scent that's ever been forgotten. Not lost, just sleeping. Waiting for a nose kind enough to remember. Because in Rome, scent was never just perfume. It was legacy, memory, love. And slowly, gently, those stories begin to fade into silence. And now, you rest. The fire's low. The last vial is corked. The air is still and warm, like linen left out in the sun. All those scents, rose, frankincense, saffron, vetiver, drift gently away, like figures retreating into a mist, fading but never quite gone. Your body remembers them. In your breath, in your skin, even in your dreams. You're no longer in the perfumery, or the temple. or the bathhouse. You're simply floating through the spaces they left behind. Maybe your fingertips still feel the waxy edge of a scroll. Maybe your mind is still chasing the recipe for that one blend you couldn't name. Or maybe, somewhere deep in your chest, a ghost of nard and myrrh still lingers, soft as a sigh. Let it stay. Let your breath slow. Let your shoulders sink into the bed or cushion or dream where you now lie. Let your thoughts move slower, wider, like smoke rising without destination. There's no need to remember every detail. Scent is like that, subtle, elusive, meaningful even when nameless. All you need now is to drift, to allow the quiet to fill in the space where story lived. Because this was never just about Roman perfume. It was about time, about sensation, about staying a little longer in a world that tried so hard to bottle beauty. And as that world fades, as the final notes dissolve, you're left with peace, warmth, and the memory of a fragrance you can't describe, only feel. So close your eyes. Let the last breath in be slow. And sleep. Sweet dreams.